Okay, we're slowing down. I'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, December 16th, and we will hear a climate mitigation and adaptation primer for planners. For technical help during the webcast, you can just type questions into the questions field. Don't bother looking at that graphic there. That's from our old platform that we had. And if you have any questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the questions box and we will get to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2022. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are sponsored by a consortium of APA divisions to bring you another episode in this sustainability and resilience series, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a few moments. But our official host within this consortium is the Sustainable Communities Division. So thanks to you all and all the divisions that are participating in this series for making this webcast possible.
Hey, Christine,
yes.
I don't think the screen is being shared. So we have one, I don't see it, and we have a chat message saying the same thing.
Let me try. Oh, my goodness. This is what happens when I get new technology. What about now? Can you see it now?
I think that there it is. All right. Yep. So I don't know if you want to put this.
There we go. Thank you. I appreciate that. So today's session is worth 1.5 CM credits and 1 of the sustainability and resiliency credits. You can log those by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcasts. And you'll also hear more about this later, but this session is being recorded and available for on-demand credits as well through the end of the year. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post important date or time change information when we have new sessions for you to register for. And I also remind everyone of our upcoming weekly session. And also, like I said, we record all of our sessions. We post them onto our YouTube channel. This Sustainability and Resiliency series actually has its own little playlist. So you can see a log of all of the sessions. I think we ended up counting 7 from this year. Including today. So just head over to YouTube and type in planning webcast and we'll pop up along with our well over 400 session recordings. They're all available for you to view for free. So be sure to subscribe to our channel so that you get notified when new sessions have been posted to our channel. So again, if you have any questions, type them in that questions box. I'm going to start looking at them now, and I'm going to turn it over to Ben Moore to kick things off here, and I'll give the controls over to you, Aaron, in just a moment.
Thanks, Christine. And I believe Matt's going to be putting the deck on the screen in just a second. But while that happens, I want to introduce myself. I'm Ben Moore. More on that in a second. I'm very happy to present today's session. This is just in time for you to be able to take great information about sustainability and resilience back to your families for the holidays and tell them all about this important issue. But I'd like to tell you a little about the series overall and encourage you to keep attending and to get involved. The Sustainability and Resilience series was created to provide learning opportunities for planning professionals like yourself to broaden and deepen your knowledge on these subjects with a range of topic options available while allowing you to earn the all-important AICP Resilience and Sustainability CM credit. And of course, you can earn regular AICP credit if you've already fulfilled that requirement. You've already heard how much this session is going to be worth. The series and the development of the AICP credit before it are based on definitions of sustainability and resilience and 12 content topic areas under that wide umbrella. You're going to be able to earn CM credit for either this version of the presentation, the live version, but we will have an on-demand version of the series, as Christine said, and there's going to be a permanent library of resources available for free, thanks to the efforts of our fellow professionals donating their time to make these events possible. Already on demand on the Ohio Chapter Planners webcast series platform or on the YouTube playlist are sessions on extreme weather trends, climate science and planning, the relationship of climate resilience and public health through the lens of planning with Native American communities, technology tools for sustainability, federal funding tools for sustainability, and electric vehicle policy. So lots of great stuff already available to you to impress your friends and relatives this Christmas time. Today's session will be available on demand next week. If you have any colleagues who might like to see it, of course, it'll be available thereafter. We've got a lot in store for 2023 as well. We're actively looking for APA members to help organize sessions and advise on the implementation of this series, to help us promote it, to connect good speakers with the series. So any of you who are interested in joining this committee should reach out to myself, Christine, any of the speakers today, and we can help plug you in to what we're up to. We're more than happy to have you. As for future topics, upcoming sessions will get into such things as economic strategy, preparedness strategies, policy tools, among others. And as I mentioned, your ideas can influence what will be covered in upcoming sessions. The whole point of this is to meaningfully address as well the social equity implications of this topic and raise the bar for how marginalized communities are included in the planning process for adaptation, mitigation, sustainability, resilience, etc. On the next slide, just to make sure that you are indeed in the right place, you're about to participate in a primer for for planners on climate mitigation and adaptation. And we're going to provide you today with some useful information about how to move forward with climate mitigation and adaptation planning. The goal, of course, is to lower greenhouse gas emissions, and then by doing so, reduce community risk and vulnerability. We're going to learn about various aspects of the science of climate change, the basics of climate mitigation and adaptation, which can be implemented in your community, and then steps and resources available to planners to help get involved. You're also going to have the opportunity to ask some questions. There's going to be a few polling questions after I'm done speaking in which you can help us get to understand who you are and what your needs are. On the next slide, I'm really happy to introduce briefly our panelists who will say more about themselves when the time comes. I'm Ben Moore. I'm sustainability leader with RSNH. I've been working in this field my entire career of about 15 years, had a chance to do planning at various levels for the Department of Defense, for states, DOTs, transit authorities, municipalities, airports, etc. And this is a great session that I think will help you get involved in similar work. We also have Matt Buchan, Deputy Practice Leader of Planning at Half and Associates, and Aaron Tooley, who's the Planning Technical Leader at Half, who have put together great content. So on the next slide, I wanted to start today's primer by asking the obvious question, why us? Why planners? Could someone else be doing this besides us? Well, sure, but we planners have unique skills that make us very well suited for engaging on this topic. We have a comprehensive perspective. We do comprehensive plans after all, but in all of our plans, we're balancing multiple perspectives. We have that long range outlook. Many of our plans have 20 to 50-year time horizons, of course. And while climate change is first and foremost a global phenomenon and global, national, regional, and state level action is essential, the effects are local and as are many of the solutions, and we know local. We're also very concerned with the health and safety and welfare of our communities. These social dimensions are central to the triple bottom line approach to sustainability. We specialize in community engagement. The major changes to our way of life that are required to deal with climate change require widespread public support and an emphasis on equitable outcomes. And our job by nature is very collaborative. We're constantly working across discipline department, which provides us the capacity for solutions leadership in what is a multidiscipline challenge. So on the next slide, as mentioned, we planners take a comprehensive, long-term, multifaceted approach to our work. And here on the screen, you see several kinds of plans we tend to be involved in. Of course, some are short-term, some are very long-term. A strategic plan might have a 50-year life. a master plan for a complex organization of capital projects might be 20 years. Safety management, has a very short time frame to it. Capital planning can get quite involved and can sometimes look at very distant time frames. But the problem here is that climate risks unfold over decades, centuries. And this is a longer time frame than we're typically confronting and planning. On the next slide, I try to help us understand how can we conceptualize these very long planning horizons that we're dealing with climate. Here you see a graph with the climate change impacts increasing over time up to and beyond 2100. That's 80 years from now. So how does a planner working today conceptualize actions that can unfold over such a time frame? So some of you are on this call or on the phone and you're thinking, well, I'm near retirement. I might be ending my career in the next 10 or 20 years. So what does this have to do with my job if we're talking about 80 years into the future? Well, consider one of your recent new hires. They're going to be planning professionally for the next 40 years. And that new hire's child might have a 100-year lifespan. That would be great, right? And their child, your new employee's grandchild, will be living well past the 2100s. So that's a very personal take on climate that I think makes it a little bit easier to contemplate out to 2100. What about a professional take? Think about a development proposal before you, or a buildings or infrastructure project, even a retrofit project. The design phase or the design life of a project like that could be 10 to 50 years. Say 10 years for an energy efficiency project, 50 years for a building. But we all know that in actuality, these projects could live, quote unquote, for 20 to 100 years. Some infrastructure and buildings, if designed well, of course, could last well beyond 100 years. That's our goal sometimes. But mitigation and adaptation impacts that we plan today and in the future will unfold across this entire timeline and hopefully affect the intensity of climate change impacts as a result every year between now and 2100. And we want to bend that climate change impacts curve down from that sort of exponential curve into something more manageable. The next slide gets into another major challenge with climate change mitigation and adaptation planning. And that's the idea that the past, which developers, architects, engineers rely upon to guide their work, is no longer a good guide to design for the future. So this deep uncertainty, which, to be very clear, is not about the science of climate change, but about the very local when and where climate change effects manifest themselves, is something that requires planning. And so it generates these questions. Instead of forecasting the future or backcasting from the future from a desired state, we need to think about what are all the kinds of things that could happen and how likely are they? What's their probability? And if they happen, what's our risk tolerance? Are we willing to accept a lot of risk, or can we accept no risk? And we need to know what's vulnerable. Some things are vulnerable, some things are not. Some things are more vulnerable than other things. And that gets into what are our priorities going to be? Not everything has equal priority when we're thinking about the future of climate change. And that gets into helping us decide, when should we act? Should we act now, or should we wait 10 years, 20 years and then act? And then after we've acted, is there a time where we need to change course and start to engage in other adaptation actions or mitigation actions as we cross certain thresholds? And then an important question is, how much resilience is enough for this particular instance? We could build, if you think about the Sanibel Island Causeway, which was washed out in Hurricane Ian, we could build a bridge from the mainland to the island, but that might cost $1 billion. So if we can't afford $1 billion, how much resilience is enough? And then, and with all of these kinds of questions, who benefits? If we're going to spend money on mitigation, adaptation, are those benefits being equitably distributed, or are just some folks benefiting from it? We need to think very clearly about that. And I guess I want to challenge you to think about who is going to answer these questions other than planners. On the next slide, we can get into some of the folks that could possibly answer this question. Is it architecture? Is it engineering? Is it construction? Is it O&M? Is it policy people? Is it economics? Is it lawyers? Is it science? All these folks are going to have to work together in a very collaborative way. And what I would suggest to you is that interaction, that is climate mitigation and adaptation planning. And that is why you planners are the ones that need to make this happen. So and on the next slide, I just want to leave you with some maybe inspiration for a topic that can sometimes feel kind of gloomy and doomy. Make big plans, aim high and hope and work. Long after we're gone, the plan will be a living thing. And of course, the patron saint of our profession, Daniel Burnham, said this back in the 19th century. And I think that's a back to the future moment, right? Like back to the roots of our profession. Daniel Burnham, who, you know, influenced the shape and form of cities for a century after he was gone. That's what we're talking about here. So this climate adaptation mitigation planning is taking us back to our roots, back to the future, make big plans. Matt and Aaron are going to take you into that in a second, but before we do, Christine's going to run a little poll among you so we can get some level setting, and then we'll be off to the races.
Wonderful. So the first question we're going to ask is an open-ended question. So we just want you to put it in the questions box. Our panelists would like to know today where y'all are from. So go ahead and list that in there, and then we can all take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll here. And if someone could just type in and let me know that they see it. This is a little bit of a learning curve here. This is the first time we've used Zoom with a polling. So I just want to make sure that everyone can see it. I see it. Oh, yay. Thank you. All right. I'll give it a few more seconds here. So we just want to know who you work for. Are you, public, nonprofit, private, what have you. And while we finish up on this poll, I'm just going to, let's see, we got Southern Illinois, Chicago, Houston, Oregon, San Francisco, Pennsylvania, Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Lake Tahoe, Illinois, Colorado, Baltimore, Indiana, North Carolina, Arizona, Chicago, New Jersey, Washington, Nevada, everywhere. We love it. Boston, Austin. Where are my Ohio people at? Hello? Where are you guys at? Oh, Dayton. There we go. Cleveland. Oh, hey, Krista. Okay. There's my Ohio people. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. And frankly, I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to read the results. We're all learning this together. So right now, let's see, the highest percentage, interestingly, is the private sector, 33%. This interests me. City, 27%, county, 16%, regional, 7%, state, 7%. It doesn't look like anyone. Oh, it looks like we maybe have one person coming from indigenous tribal nations, 2% nonprofit, 1% student, and 7% other. And then our second question, how familiar are you with local climate action planning? 50% somewhat familiar. Okay. And then 16% split between somewhat unfamiliar and very familiar. And then 7% is unfamiliar. So that's where we're at. That's who we've got on the line. Thanks, everybody. Oh, it looks like I can share the results. Look at that. So everyone can see. Who knew? This is good to know. More Cleveland, Indianapolis. Thanks, everybody. More from San Francisco, DC. All right. I am going to turn it back over. All right, Aaron, you should have the ability now to share.
Can you all see that?
Not yet.
Am I
Not yet.
sharing? No?
Nope.
All right.
There we go.
No?
Okay.
Beautiful.
All right. Well, I'll start off with what a fantastic introduction setting the stage by Ben Moore. I don't think he could have prepped this conversation any better. We'll introduce, Aaron and I will introduce ourselves just a slide or two, but I know both of us are so excited to have this conversation with you. It's a topic, as Ben was clearly illustrating, that this is going to be a topic that everyone on the phone call today, on this webinar today, is going to be spending the rest of your careers interacting with. And our premise for today, our premise for writing the PS report was to really create that primer for planners to have that base foundation of information and resources at their fingertips so that you're able to move forward in your careers and continue to learn more about this. And so it's a complicated subject, and the picture on the screen perfectly illustrates this. This is a graphic coming out from our world of data that illustrates the actual movement and intensity of carbon. It's from data coming from the European Commission back in 2018, clearly shows not only the hotspots across the world, the US, Europe, not England, China and India, but it also illustrates the carbon emissions coming from all the stuff that we transport in our shipping lanes and our planes of that sort. And we also know, you read the bottom there, 34 billions of tons of CO2. That is what humans emit every year. So we already quantifiably know how much we need to get rid of to solve this problem. It's really about what do we have to do differently moving forward to achieve that pretty surmountable goal or insurmountable goal. Next slide. And then just diving into the US for a second or so. We are by far the largest emitter. We have the biggest hurdle to overcome to help out the world in solving this climate crisis. And that's going to start with planners. Next slide. So our agenda for today is really to kind of overview this report, not verbatim, but overview kind of the story of this report and how it unfolded. We did create this report to be this kind of primer for planners. So we're going to touch a little bit on climate science and key impacts. Aaron's going to jump in and dive into the climate mitigation adaptation, and then I'm going to conclude with really going through all the tools and resources that have been done through APA Sustainable Community Divisions, and others that are embedded in the report so that you can hit the ground running. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A near the end. Next slide. So Aaron, Tooley, and I, we're the primary authors of the Planning for Climate Mitigation and Adaptation report. But we're not the only ones that worked on this. This is really an effort coming out of APA Sustainable Communities Division, and every one of those case study contributors, everyone that was involved in creating the tools that I'll go over to later, all were volunteers that were contributing their time, effort, and resources to pull together this information. And as you're going through this, and if you see things that you're excited about related to climate change or anything else that APA does, you could be that future volunteer to help people out to create that next set of resources. And so I challenge you to kind of listen along and understand where you could be a contributor down the future, because it's all about us and you pulling this information together for everybody. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, go back up one slide. So real quick, Aaron Tooley and myself. So my name is Matt Buchin. I'm a deputy practice leader with a company called Half Associates. We're a mid-sized AE firm based out of Texas, but we have 27 offices all across the South. My job is to pretty much work with planners from all across our company and all across the South. And then beyond that, beyond being a primary author of this PS report, a team author of APA's Climate Change Policy Guide, I also spent several years as the chair of APA's Sustainable Communities Division, and over a decade of volunteering with that group to help develop resources just like that. Aaron, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Great, thanks, Matt. Yes, I am a planner operating in our Houston office of Half Associates. I am the technical planning lead for our practice, one of two, and we assist planners throughout our company in trying to solve complex problems and that kind of thing. But I have had the great value and opportunity to have been working within the climate change arena since, I guess, about 2005, when I was trained by former Vice President Al Gore after his release of An Inconvenient Truth. He started a major crusade in training people about the science, about climate change, and how to effectively communicate that information as well. So I've benefited from that, and I welcome the next opportunity to make a presentation. So thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, so just to set the stage for the report, the next slide. So we're not going to go through this verbatim, but just to give you a little bit of introduction to what's in that report. So chapter 1, do you want to advance, Aaron? Really is that introduction, kind of painting the picture of where we're at, dives into the conversation about why planners should be taking the lead. Chapter 2 is related to climate science, a brief understanding of climate science and how it contributes to impacts across the country and across the world. Just for a basic premise of this, as you think about your learning in the future of climate change, you don't need to be the expert in everything or the expert in climate science, but you do need to have an informed understanding so that you can be in conversations. And it's also not a bad idea to have a general understanding of what are the typical pushbacks by our naysayers. So when they bring it up, you can refute and then move back on to the conversation at hand. Chapter 3 is this introduction to mitigation and adaptation, tying how those two together, if we do it right, builds climate resilient communities. Chapter 4 and 5 is really diving into the mitigation side. Aaron's going to talk about this. 4 is on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and what that looks like. 5 is really the chapter for planners on the policy, the regulatory frameworks, things of that sort. Next slide. Chapter 6 and 7 is the same framework for adaptation. 6 is on the basic adaptation. 7's on how we address it as planners. 7 and 8 offer 12 separate case studies that I'll dive into later, but just a plethora of resources pulled together that are just a toolbox at your fingertips to go learn from and pull information from, so you don't have to start from scratch and you can hit the ground running. And then chapter 10, I'll go into a little bit detail at the end of this presentation about all the tools that we've been working on, all the tools that were embedded within this climate change PS report, so that you can start from a great starting point. Next slide. Before I turn it over to Aaron, just some of the key big takeaways from the climate change PS report, and just like Ben kind of hit it on the head, it can be kind of doom and gloom, but climate change is it's getting worse, and it's getting worse at an increasing rate, getting worse much faster. The impacts of climate change are intensifying, as you see on the news every day, and they're not equal. So we'll touch a little bit on in various places of how our disadvantaged and vulnerable communities are taking the brunt of this. The global resources to address climate change haven't been near enough. If we want to make a dent, remember from that picture I showed in the beginning about who the big players are, the US needs to play a leadership role. It's got to be comprehensive in how we fundamentally do things. And if we want to get moving, planners are going to need to take the lead. So the bottom says 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, net zero by 2050. This is basically the global target, the commitment out there, where this is what the global community says they want to do. You'll see later, we may not be getting there. And I have the word moving target because it's a moving target, because every day we don't do something, it becomes increasingly more difficult and more faster that it has to occur to make a dent. So the moving target isn't that these numbers are changing, it's the speed and intensity of actually change that we got to do to get there. So I'm going to turn this over to Aaron just for a couple slides to kind of talk about some of the climate science stuff.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And as we were talking about earlier, we're not going to totally get into the science behind climate change, but there is kind of a scientific concept that provides the foundation for everything that has been built upon it to what we know today about climate change. And it's referred to as the Keeling curve and the Earth's breathing cycle. So I'm just going to run through this very quickly, but it'll hopefully provide you with some grounding as far as how we understand climate change. So if we think of the land mass that makes up our planet, and if we divide that land mass along the equator, the land mass in the southern hemisphere, of course, is much less in area than the land mass in the northern hemisphere. In fact, it's about, I looked it up this morning, the land mass in the southern hemisphere is 32% of the total land mass, and then in the northern hemisphere, it's 68%. So the northern hemisphere is a little bit more than twice as much as the southern hemisphere. But when it's summertime in the northern hemisphere, when all the trees have leaves on them and they're producing oxygen through photosynthesis. The Earth is like breathing. It's the concentrations, the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide reduce atmosphere within the Earth's atmosphere because so much oxygen is being produced. But then when it's summertime in the southern hemisphere and all the trees in the northern hemisphere are dormant, then the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide increase significantly. So we have this kind of inhaling, exhaling kind of effect within our atmosphere. Well, high above, up on top of the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, Charles Keeling, this is back in the 60s, realized this. He was starting to track and measure atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide throughout the seasons. And he started realizing how there is this kind of breathing cycle. But also, more importantly, as he charted this over time, he realized that not only the ebbs and flows, the seasonal ebbs and flows were very consistent, but the rate of increase in atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide was also very consistent, and it was growing at an alarming rate. And also with the, of course, with the increase in atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide is a subsequent increase in global temperature. So this was what started the alarm bell ringing for a lot of our scientific community, and this is where we are today. But so this is like provides irrefutable evidence of that there is an association between atmospheric concentrations of carbon and global warming. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Matt. Oh, let me have one. I have one more slide. I'm sorry. So this is a slide that I've been using since 2006. I've modified it a little bit, but scientists are forewarning that at approximately 450 parts per million atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, we will trigger potentially irreversible glacial melt and sea level rise, which will be virtually out of humanity's control to be able to deal with. We're currently at 421 parts per million atmospheric concentrations of carbon, and are increasing at a rate of about 2 parts per million annually. I crossed this out because when I started, this thing was at 385 parts per million, and I never thought that we would be increasing at such a rapid rate. But at the current growth rate of about 1.5%, we do stand to reach this concentration by as soon as 2035. So I haven't changed that since 2005, and it's alarmingly consistent even today. So that's our challenge.
And Aaron, when you started to get involved with this at 385, I mean, just think about the early organization that's still out there, 350.org. It was like, we have to get in front of this before it hits 350. And
exactly right. And just to add to that, Matt, 350 ppm was what was identified within the Kyoto Protocol. That was the place where the world, the scientific community thought we needed to be. But
can I interrupt and just ask a quick question? I know we have the Q&A at the end, but if we could go back 2 slides when it showed kind of the ebb and flow, carbon dioxide. Yes, that. So I'm seeing that says NASA at the bottom. Who exactly created this chart?
this was created by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's been utilized by multiple agencies, though, throughout the years.
And then is there anything, just because I'm seeing all these questions come in, and so I just want us to have this. Is there anything that we can show physically, the connection between increased carbon dioxide as it relates to the Earth warming? How is there some kind of something that we can show that shows the relationship between an increase in carbon dioxide is the result of an increase in carbon dioxide is our Earth is warming?
Yes.
So
if you want, I mean,
Is it in
if you
there?
want us to show,
Right.
we can show it on the screen if you wanted to. We have those slides available.
Yeah, we
Is-
have those slides, and just to summarize quickly, climatologists and climate scientists are able to track, going back some 850,000 years, the atmospheric concentrations of carbon versus the atmospheric temperatures. And so we do have those graphs. I don't know if we can pull those up, Matt, but
Christine, do you want me to pull those up quick and share my
Yeah,
screen?
if you guys want to move along, and then if Matt, if you want to pull those up and I can give you,
I have them at my fingertips. If
you
want.
do? Okay, hold on. If we can, real quick, just there's a lot of questions about this, so I figured I might as well interject right now. You should be able to share your screen, Matt.
Share screen. Share screen. Alrighty. You have to. Looks like I have to unshare, Aaron.
stop share.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not trying to derail us. I
Oh,
just
you're
see
good,
these
you're
come in,
good.
and I thought this would be a good time to
Make sure.
put this in a nice bow.
I think I might share the wrong screen, but we'll see.
We see historical atmospheric CO2.
All right, so this is exactly what I
Perfect.
think you're talking about. So what you're going to see is the historical CO2 emissions over the last 800,000 years, right?
Uh-huh.
You can see that it goes up in cycles. Kind of the top is, where the dinosaurs are, kind of like, kind of the planet's warm. The bottom is ice ages, right? So watch what happens when you track global warming or global average temperatures over the last 800,000 years with CO2. As CO2 goes up, average global temperatures go up. As CO2 goes down, global average temperature follows. Now let's look at where
Oh.
where we're going potentially with what happens where we're in a point where we have not seen this kind of CO2 concentration, greenhouse gas concentrations. You can see at the top of the screen how far it's up, right? That's where, that's basically where we are right now. And global warming or the change in global average temperature is a lagging indicator. So it doesn't happen immediately, it happens over time, but you can already see right now with the increases that we've seen that the global average temperature, which should be, I don't know if you can see my cursor,
Mhm.
which should be in a cooling cycle, has gone up 1.1 degrees Celsius. That's what we're currently, or almost 1.2, just since the Industrial Revolution. And where some of the projections are going, before I turn it back over to Aaron for his screen sharing, is if we don't get under control and where the, after 40 more years of increases in carbon dioxide, this is potentially what you could see off the charts. So with that, I'll turn it back to Aaron and we'll go back to the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see that?
Not yet.
Here
How
we
about
go.
that?
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yep.
All right. So where are we? So we kind of talked about the currently are at 1.1, 1.2 in increases in global average temperature. We kind of talked about where we are in association with carbon dioxide and what that trends are showing. Right now, with current policies, meaning kind of what the governments and things that are happening, we're set for 2.5, 2.9 degrees Celsius. So significantly higher than where we are today by 2100. If you go into what they're doing in the UN framework and the IPCC and COP27, the pledges and targets for things that we have that we've committed to say we're going to fix this problem, that only gets us, according to the data, to 2.1. So it exceeds the 1.5 and the 2.0 that were agreed to in the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. And the problem is most of those countries and commitments, they're not meeting them. So even though they've made the commitments, they're not meeting them. So that's why they're saying current policies that up here. But you can see the significance between what needs to happen to get to stay at the 1.5 degree Celsius increase, which was that's what the target is, to definitely be no more than 2. Here's what we're saying we're going to commit to. Here's where we really are. And if we don't get under control, this is where it could be going. So it kind of paints the picture of, we know the data, we just now have to make the changes, and it's not easy. Next slide, Aaron. So just to further paint the picture of what's the difference. I mean, how big of a deal is 1.5, 2.0 degrees Celsius? So just some of the impacts on that, just thinking of sea level, sea level rise. If we hit the 1.5, it's a certain threshold. If we don't, we hit 2.0. The impacts on sea level rise and the impacts on coastal communities are 10 times worse just between 1.5 and 2.0. Ecosystem loss, species loss for vertebrates and plants. Projections that we'll lose 4% of our species if we hit by 1.5. If just 0.5 more, 8% of our plants and vertebrates will be lost. So double the impact just by getting that extra 0.5. Doubling of the ecosystem shifts, the permafrost frost, which is numbers are probably not easily to comprehend, but 38 times worse. Why is that a big deal? Because there's so much methane, which is also a greenhouse gas, a very potent greenhouse gas, stored in the permafrost that's melting. Impacts on our crop yields, coral reef decline. So at the 1.5, a loss of 70 to 90% of our coral reefs. To go up to 2.0, what the projections show is almost 100% loss of our coral reefs that some people say is almost unrecoverable. Next slide. And so the impacts of climate change are pretty much everything that we possibly can think of and everything that we deal with as planners, whether directly or indirectly. From the ones that we see most of are extreme weather events like droughts, more infrequent events, more wildfires. These are things that and sea level rise, things that we kind of hear about a lot and we have a little bit of interaction with, but it pretty much covers everything that we do within the natural and built environment. So next slide dives a little bit in detail on that, showing the different sectors that it impacts and what are just some of those impacts. So transportation, our roads are designed to meet a standard of a historical climate and kind of a historical regime. But when those thresholds are exceeded, the temperatures that we hit in our road as we tend to warm, those roadways start to fail. That starts to decrease our system reliability. What is this transition to electrification for vehicles? How does that impact our design? And how does all this interact with our extreme weather disruptions in our transportation network? So all these things are more specific things that you would interact with than just the topics that you see up there. Next slide. And then the other conversation that's going on right now is the cost of dealing with the increasing issues with climate change. So here's just a geographic distribution of the 2022 $1 billion weather and climate disasters. You can see that it covers a whole host of different types of disasters, from derechos up in the Midwest to wildfires in Nevada, to drought and heat waves out west, to hurricanes, tornadoes, things of that sort. But this only paints half the picture, and the next slide paints the other half. And that is, not only is it affecting all of our geographic areas, the number, the intensity, and the cost to recover from these events is also skyrocketing. So this just shows the picture, just at its face value, of what we were seeing, the number of disasters that were hitting $1 billion thresholds in 1980, and now going up into 2020, just 40 years later, just significantly increased impacts, cost, for in a time and place where there's not a lot of money to respond to these things. And there's increasing amount of competing priorities for that amount of dollars. Of course, caveat, there's a lot of federal stimulus right now, but outside of the federal stimulus, which will end, the amount of future money is less. Next slide, please. And then finally, when we think about climate impacts, as planners, we cannot disregard the fact that many or most, and the most probably significant impacts will be realized and impacting our disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. Why is that? Well, it's because many of those same communities were already put in areas that were already at risk. So, you know, neighborhoods that were put in floodplains, or poor building conditions, or next to, you know, high industry area that was spewing greenhouse gas emissions, things of that sort. So as the impacts increasingly get worse, these vulnerable communities will also be impacted greater. Another perfect example would be like extreme heat, and clearly shows that poor and vulnerable communities have significantly less tree cover and access to shade than some of our more affluent communities. And so as increasing temperatures go up, they'll be subject to more impacts from things just like that. Next slide. And so I got a couple of slides before I turn it back over to Aaron. So, you know, what's the answer? We just need to get rid of fossil fuels, right? And we can add a few more solar panels, we can buy a few more electric cars, and we'll be good to go. But the problem is that's not really true. Next slide. Because greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, they are pretty much embodied into all sectors of our built environment. And Aaron's going to go into this in detail. The way that we transport things, 29%, or 20, depending on the data source, 27%. How we power things, 25%. The industry, so how we make things, 23%. How we grow things and grow our food, 10%. All the way down to that 7 and 6%. So actually buildings itself are only about 13 or 14% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's part of it, is that they're everywhere, but the other part of it is that fossil fuels are also in everything. And what that means is where we get our materials. There's greenhouse gases emitted when we mine, when we cut forests, when we do, when we manufacture things in kind of a manufacturing place. It's also released when we do construction of the built environment. And then once we have it built, carbon emissions are also released when we're operating and we're maintaining and repairing. And then all the way through when we deconstruct and we get rid of carbon emissions, or embodied carbon, operational carbon, are involved in all these steps. And so in order to get to that, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, that net zero by 2050, it's going to have to address every sector of the natural and built environments. And I'm going to turn that over to Aaron to start that conversation.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Just to follow on to what Matt is elaborating upon, to ensure this kind of safe future that's well below a 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, it's going to require that we cut carbon emissions worldwide by 30 gigatons annually by 2030. So that is a hugely ambitious kind of objective. And focusing on transportation and industry, as Matt was mentioning, is simply not going to be enough. We're going to have to really look at all sectors to see how we can cut emissions, but how can we manage our land and resources more efficiently? How can we build smarter, more efficient cities? How can we curb deforestation and better manage food waste, for example, among a whole host of other things? But as I think we all recognize, we lead totally unsustainable lifestyles. If everybody wanted to live like we do in the United States, it would require over an additional 4 planet Earths and all of the resources therein, just to live like we do in the United States. And so we as planners, but also as citizens of this planet, as Matt was alluding to, we need to embrace more of a life cycle thinking kind of concept, whereby when we're purchasing things, we're thinking about how was it manufactured? How much energy went into this glass bottle? Where was it transported from? how is it going to be disposed? Recycling is certainly not the end all be all that I think we all thought about, because that glass bottle is going to need to be crushed up and then remelted and then reformed into a glass bottle. So all of the heat that's embodied in some of these processes are just completely, a lot of carbon emissions, of course, but completely unsustainable. So the more we can start thinking in terms of the products, services that we utilize, the carbon intensity, but also how we can reuse these and kind of make better decisions based on this is imperative. So now to the topic of this webinar, planning for climate change with respect to mitigation and adaptation. So when we discuss climate change mitigation, we're referring to those actions that reduce anthropogenic or human-produced greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to global warming and climate change. When we refer to adaptation, we're referring to actions to manage the risks imposed by climate change. So together, mitigation and adaptation represent two complementary approaches to addressing climate change, both of which must be successfully integrated to achieve their respective aims. So then with regard to the attributes that must be included within any kind of climate change management program, let me just say that by integrated, we mean identifying the interdependencies between mitigation and adaptation, excuse me, to maximize efficiencies and then also to minimize risk. By integrated, we mean identifying those interdependencies, excuse me, I just said that. But also to address climate change fully, our planning program must be evidence-based, inclusive, and transparent, and able to deliver the results in achieving mitigation and adaptation policies. By inclusive, we mean the plan ensures that diverse stakeholders are involved in the planning process, that policy design and delivery is fair and accessible, and the benefits of mitigation and adaptation actions are distributed equitably. As mentioned, mitigation must be focused first and foremost on decarbonization and reducing the demand for carbon-intensive processes, products, and services within multiple sectors in order to prevent further warming of the planet. Mitigation is also focused on sequestering carbon through preserving and developing carbon sinks, which remove carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it. Carbon sinks include forests and soils. Oceans are also, they also function as carbon sinks, but in absorbing carbon, it increases the acidification of oceans, which thereby destroys all kind of calcium-based life forms in the ocean. So that is a problem. Again, climate change adaptation refers to altering our behavior and the systems upon which we rely in order to protect our way of life from the impacts of climate change. So without meaning to oversimplify the comparison, where mitigation is more global in scale in terms of how emissions are measured and typically involves emissions reductions across multiple sectors in order to reduce the overall impact of climate change, such as sea level rise, extreme heat, increased storm events, etc. Adaptation is more local and focused on addressing both structurally and non-structurally a specific climate variable impacting a community. So mitigation is kind of more global and focused on removing the problem. Adaptation is really focused on addressing the problems at hand at a local level. When developing climate mitigation and adaptation policies, every attempt should be made to integrate policies with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals so as to deliver as many co-benefits and equitable outcomes as possible, which are geared toward, of course, improving the quality of life and economic well-being within our communities. Climate change planning typically can be found with regard to mitigation and adaptation in several different regulatory frameworks, including comprehensive plans, climate adaptation or climate action plans, mitigation-oriented ordinances, and greenhouse gas inventories. When it comes to incorporating climate change mitigation and adaptation actions into comprehensive plans, policies and strategies can be, first of all, prepared in the context and integrated with conventional plan elements, or in a lot of cases, as we have provided examples of in the PAS report, they can be a standalone climate change element. But implementable mitigation policies and comp plans can include everything from increasing the use of renewable energy to providing increased options for active transportation, designing and operating more energy efficient buildings, protecting, enhancing natural systems, maximizing all of the co-benefits of ecosystem services, purchasing climate-friendly products, and most importantly, educating the public on what are the socioeconomic and public health ramifications of climate change. So key mitigation planning principles: setting ambitious yet realistic and attainable goals, making sure that we're relying on a very accurate and current data fact base, outlining diverse strategies to achieve those goals, making sure there is adequate and equitable public engagement, ensuring that the process is transparent and understandable, working across multiple jurisdictions and governmental entities, and then ensuring that the sources of uncertainties and incorporating different scenarios are incorporated into plan development. So two plans that we do characterize, or actually we only characterize the Las Vegas one in the PAS report, but two examples of individual plan elements that are built into comprehensive plans. The City of Las Vegas's 2050 master plan has a climate change element, and the Broward County, Florida, also their comprehensive plan has a comprehensive or a climate change element as well, focusing on, again, reducing emissions in a variety of different sectors. The next kind of regulatory framework is a climate action plan, or a CAP. And a climate action plan is a detailed and strategic framework for measuring, planning, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions while addressing related climate impacts. CAPs are produced at the regional, state, and municipal levels of government and build on information that's gathered within greenhouse gas inventories. And here you can see a fairly simplified step-by-step process where in developing a CAP, you begin by preparing a greenhouse gas inventory. That will then inform your emissions reduction targets. You will then prepare a climate action plan which outlines a roadmap of policies and actions for achieving targets. Then you work toward implementing those CAP policies, and then develop the requisite metrics through which to monitor and track the implementation process, and then finally recognizing the achievements from the plan. At minimum, as we've been talking about, CAPs typically inventory all of the existing emissions reduction goals and targets based on all of the key sectors that we've been talking about. Two examples of climate action plans that are summarized in the PAS report include the Chapel Hill Climate Action and Response Plan and the Whitefish, Montana Climate Action Plan. So from a municipal ordinance perspective, climate action planning can be built into zoning codes, subdivision regulations, as far as determining or establishing ways of reducing carbon emissions. When it comes to cluster development, providing those financial incentives for cluster development, thereby preserving open space and sensitive habitats for climate sinks, expanding and improving active transportation infrastructure, reducing impervious surfaces to reduce surface flooding, promoting connected, dense, and accessible land uses, promoting green municipal fleets and infrastructure, and implementing financial incentives and disincentives to reduce vehicle miles traveled and subsequent greenhouse gas emissions. Regarding greenhouse gas inventories, this is, again, the basis of any kind of climate action planning, but they're typically included in the action planning process and provide community stakeholders a comprehensive snapshot of local emissions in order to set emissions reduction targets. The inventories typically include a set number of steps where you set goals and priorities. You define the scale of the inventory, whether that's a geographic scale or whether it's sector-based. You collect and compile the data, set the base year, calculate emissions, and then if you're so inclined, you can procure certification through ISO 14064 or seek third-party verification just to, again, confirm the results. And then you can analyze and communicate the results. Moving to adaptation. Again, adaptation refers to the process of adjustment of human and natural systems to the actual or expected effects of climate change. The aim of adaptation is to achieve climate resilience, defined as the ability of urban centers and the systems on which we depend to anticipate, reduce, accommodate, and recover from the effects of a shock or a chronic stressor in a timely and efficient manner. Adaptation is not a one-time effort, but an ongoing cycle of preparation, response, and revision that involves planning, which includes assessing climate impacts and vulnerabilities, setting adaptation goals, developing strategies, to acting, which is implementing those adaptation actions and strategies, observing and learning or monitoring the effectiveness of those actions, and then going back and adjusting as necessary so that your actions and strategies can be more effective in achieving the outcomes that you're looking for. Because as Matt had described, climate change is a moving target, and we need to be able to be prepared to adjust as necessary and build those kind of mechanisms that will enable us to adjust as necessary. Vulnerability is a key kind of linchpin when it comes to climate adaptation planning, and refers to that degree to which a system is susceptible to and unable to cope with the adverse effects of climate change, including climate variability and extremes. Vulnerability is a function of the character, magnitude, and rate of climate change and variation to which a system is exposed, its sensitivity, and its adaptive capacity. The latter of which is a fairly important term. Adaptive capacity refers to the ability of an affected system, region, or community to anticipate and respond to change, minimize the consequences, recover, and take advantage of new opportunities. When it comes to developing adaptation plans or adaptation elements within comprehensive plans, there are kind of 10 key principles that a planner should definitely be embracing in formulating the plan. First, going beyond climate variability and extreme events to address the anticipated impacts of climate change. Incorporating climate change related issues systematically in relevant decision-making processes, associated processes. With reference to adaptation pathways, design decision processes with the ability to adjust over time in response to changing climatic conditions, just like we were talking about. Avoiding measures that result in an increase in vulnerability to changing climate risks, which can then lead to maladaptive consequences. And tied to that, avoiding adaptations that actually shift vulnerability from one sector or community to another location. Sixth, consider the implications of an adaptation action over both the near and long terms to ensure an action is effective over time. And as we'll discuss with regard to equitable adaptation, ensure that the needs of more vulnerable populations are addressed. Consistently build adaptive capacity across populations within a community, particularly the most vulnerable. Ninth, engage in monitoring and evaluation of climate adaptation progress. And then finally, ensure that the climate adaptation and mitigation actions are consistent with, integrated, and supportive of one another. So whether it pertains to sea level rise or drought and desertification or inland flooding, there are four kind of key categories that fall within adaptation planning: protection, accommodation, retreat, and avoidance. Protection includes those hard and soft or ecosystem-based kind of structural improvements that will enable us to carry on however we're trying to live. Accommodation has to do with altering the physical design of a structure or land in order to remain in place while accommodating whatever the changing conditions are. Retreating has to do with actually relocating infrastructure and buildings to safer areas so we can maintain our a semblance of quality of life wherever we're located. And then, avoidance, which is probably the most important kind of strategy here, is guiding new development away from areas that are potentially at high risk now and in the future. As we had talked about or mentioned as far as the protection element or strategy, these can be hard gray infrastructure, or it can be these can be nature-based solutions as far as protecting a coastline, for example, from storm surges or climate or sea level rise. And there are a whole variety of nature-based solutions that we can hopefully build into our adaptation plans. As mentioned, the construction of barrier islands to reduce the impact of storm surges, utilizing bioengineering techniques for stream bank and coastline stabilization, maintaining urban forest canopy enhancements to reduce urban heat island effects and reduce the impact of local flooding, utilizing agroforestry techniques to reduce the impact of drought and improve soil moisture, restoring coastal wetlands and salt marshes again to reduce the impact of sea level rise. So it's another alternative means of addressing adaptation with multiple ecosystem and habitat co-benefits. So when it comes to implementing equitable adaptation, as both Ben and Matt have brought up, the effects of climate change, including rising temperatures in urban areas, the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme storms and subsequent flooding, will disproportionately affect overburdened and low-income people and communities who are already facing significant economic and social challenges. As described by the Georgetown Climate Center, climate change is often described as a threat multiplier, a concept particularly applicable to social inequities. For example, people already struggling to pay a high electric bill will find it more difficult to do so when they experience more frequent heat waves or snowstorms. Finding safe and stable housing will be even more difficult if most of the affordable housing stock is located in flood-prone areas that are impacted by extreme weather. And it wasn't that long ago when we had Hurricane Katrina and the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans was completely flooded. So perfect example of inequities being played upon. And I just wanted to also mention, as Matt had mentioned earlier, but it seems like every community we work in, there is this inequitable provision of shade, whereby in this particular community, you can see on the right-hand side, so it's a low to moderate income community. There are no trees anywhere compared to virtually on the west side of the railroad tracks, you have a more affluent community and it is enshrouded in lush vegetation and is extremely shady. Just another example of a community in the north, to the north around the Great Lakes. But again, inequities when it comes to the west side of the city, low to moderate income communities and neighborhoods, a lack of vegetation, or if there is vegetation, there are weed trees that don't necessarily provide the requisite shade that you might find in more affluent areas. And so as planners, we need to really embrace these kind of issues when it comes to social and other inequities. And then finally, I'll just end by saying that another set of comprehensive plans that were both identified and summarized in the PAS report for their adaptation policies is the Plan Tucson, which really focuses on extreme heat, and then the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which developed the North Texas 2050 plan. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
Sure, thanks, Aaron. And we're running out of time, so I'm going to hit my last slides in the last 5 minutes. But you won't be at a disadvantage because pretty much everything that I'm going to cover is pretty much embodied in the 2 case study chapters, really on 1 slide or 2 slides, and everything else in the next couple of slides in chapter 10. So next slide. So Ben started off setting a great example of why planners. And here were kind of the bullet points that he went through. There's 2 more really important ones. One is the complexity, the depth, the scale, the intricacy of how it's integrating everything that we do is complex. And one of the skill sets that planners have is to take very complex information and boil it down to stuff that's understandable. And that's an important part of why planners need to be taking a leadership role in this conversation. The second thing that's not on the slide that is equally important is planners in everything that we do, from plans to codes, we are involved in policy making for our communities across the country. And so if you go to the next slide, because we're on the forefront of specifying policy, whether that policy is a specific policy itself, like a climate commitment or a greenhouse gas reduction commitment policy, or whether it's anything else that we do that sets general direction, like our long range plans, like our codes, like our capital improvement programs that we set up. Oh, those are all examples of policies, and planners are on the forefront of policy making. Next slide. So throughout chapter 10 of the PS report, we included a whole host of resources to really help you think and not have to start from scratch. So we included 10 principles for climate action, from use whole systems thinking to developing flexible cross-sector strategies, fostering those multi-benefit outcomes, make sure you're educating, don't forget about vulnerabilities, so that as you're going through to set your process, you can use these. Next slide. We also set out a 10-step process built on the foundation of three important priorities: engagement, education, and consensus building. All these difficult decisions are going to require a lot of facilitation and back and forth to make these difficult decisions. And then 10 steps from starting with your developing your future champions and leadership in the process, so that they're there to help implement this out down the road. But then going all the way through and making sure that we are understanding that this is going to be something that's going to get done, implemented, and then brought back up for future cycles, and we need to set the stage for that. Next slide. The case studies, as Aaron kind of hit on two of those, we included 12 of them, both 7 for mitigation, 5 for adaptation. We picked these because they reflected geographic areas and differences, different climate types, different climate issues. And if you go to the next slide, they really are, the next one after that, it's really about understanding that these case studies set the stage for, next one, Aaron, for what the issue was, what their regional significance was, key takeaways. And then in those case studies are tons of embedded hyperlinks to all these things that are done out there that you can go to and learn from right off from scratch. So important resources in this document. Next slide. The next one, the really important that we cross-reference in this PS report is APA's Climate Change Policy Guide. It's a separate document that comes out of APA. This one was also led by APA's Sustainable Communities Division in association with APA's Legislative and Policy Committee. But this one, if you go to the next slide, includes just fantastic resource of policy statements. And this answers one of the questions we had of, is there, what do our federal and state governments need to do? Well, inside this document is the policies that APA has said, this is what our state and federal governments need to be doing in order to support planners for moving forward. But it includes 51 specific policy statements that can be pulled right into planning. And then beyond that, 253 actual strategies to jump on and give you a head start on implementing these policies. Next slide. 3 more resources we developed through APA's Social Security, Sustainable Communities Division that are embedded in the PS report. This was done over the past 2 years in association with the Great Plains Institute. But instead of telling you that you need to go find information, this group actually pulled together a data collection process guide, walking you through the process, hundreds of resources, links that you can click on to get vulnerability assessments, calculations, data, et cetera. A development review checklist, and then ordinance language, because most of the change in our communities happen on the private side. We have a compilation that's embedded in the PS report, but on apasd.com, related to model climate ordinances and real ordinances out there that interact with climate change. Next slide. And then last slide or two, but wait, there's more. The PS report also includes the APA, the Appendix A, the glossary of terms, just key terms that come from the industry and other APA resources. The next one beyond that is the Appendix B. It goes through and highlights and summarizes the top 6 other PS reports that really have integrated climate change stuff, and 18 additional going all the way back to 2010 that have very specific references to climate change for things that you may be trying to achieve. The same thing on the past policy guides, the top 4 plus 5 others that really have integrated references. And then Appendix C, 14 pages, hundreds of strategies separate from the policy guide that dive into specific actions that you can embed in your work for making next steps in the climate change response. So tons and tons of resources. And then one more thing beyond that is the bibliography or the references page includes over 250 references hyperlinked to where they exist somewhere else on the internet of all the information that Aaron and I and our case study contributors collected over 2 years of pulling this report together. But those are also at your fingertips, so you don't have to be going out and researching this stuff from scratch. All this information is located on apascd.com's websites, as other parts up in APA's website, but you can find it all under APA-SCD. And then with that, I'm going to end with my final slide before we get the last couple of minutes for questions, is the PS report ends with a planner's commitment. And what that means is just think about all the information we talked about. It's complex, it's big, it's grand. Where do we begin? And so the PS report ends with 4 points. The first is if you want to think about what I do next to take the next step in this journey, the first one is to get educated, attend webinars, go do some other research, whatever it might be, read the PS report, just get educated on the basics of climate change or climate science. And then the next one comes from Catherine Hayhoe's work, just talk about it. The more people talk about it, the more that we can affect change. Network, whether it's with your friends, your family, APASCD, other networks that are out there. There's a ton actually referenced in the climate change PS report. And the fourth one is promote policy and take action. And what that means is it doesn't matter where you are, what you do, or even what political environment you're in, you can advance policy related to climate change. Even in the political naysayer communities, you can do what is good for that response, just not call it that. A lot of good planning principles out there also positively influence climate issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to, I believe, Christine to facilitate a couple questions.
Great, thank you. Man, you really blew through that. Nice work. Real quick, in your chat box, I put links to both the PAS report and the policy guide. So you have direct links to those. And then just based out of it, you can go into the Q&A and you'll see that Ben and Matt have answered some of the questions. So you can see those. One of the biggest themes that I have seen coming out of this is CO2 the primary contributor to global warming? We know that there are other greenhouse gases that are more potent, but like their half-life is different. So we understand this. Can you say with just based on what you know that CO2 is actually the primary contributor, and where does it say that officially somewhere that we can hand to our skeptical friends, family, public officials to show them that in fact it is carbon dioxide that is the largest contributor to global warming?
Aaron, do you want to take it or do you want me to take it?
Well, I'll begin, Matt, by just saying that carbon dioxide is one of several greenhouse gases. There are some that are much more volatile than carbon dioxide, but they may have a shorter shelf life or lifespan, if you will. Methane is much more damaging than carbon dioxide, but I don't think it remains in the atmosphere as long as carbon. So where we would, I would say if you're looking for definitive evidence of this, where it's written down, I would definitely look at the EPA's website, because they're all over this. Matt, do you have any additional thoughts?
Sure. I kind of question that's the question. I think that I read the question or the couple questions as, is it human caused carbon emissions? And we kind of hit on throughout the PS board presentation is that all these numbers are definitively calculated to the exact amount of what goes on in the natural environment and what is human caused coming from anthropogenic climate issues. I know it was referenced in the question about the IPCC. The IPCC, one of the little teeny problems I think with the IPCC is it is the most definitive. It's the global resource that's out there, but it's kind of complicated to really understand because it really is a scientifically generated, and it's all couched in probabilities and things of that sort. An equally great resource that I think is great for the United States comes from the United States Global Change Research Program, and their development of their same thing as what IPCC does, but for the U.S. it's the NCA, the National Climate Assessment. Right now they have the draft out for number 5. I think it's done every 4 years. But that'll have like 1,000 pages of information going through all the climate science in the U.S., all the impacts, all the regional, what's going on to achieve it. But all this stuff, the calculations are out there. After this, we can find and get you a source, just to send you a source. But probably find 100 sources that quantifiably show that it's coming. That the impact on the U.S. on the world is coming from the anthropogenic side of carbon emissions or the greenhouse gas emissions. And that if we get that down to what occurs naturally, then we start to stabilize.
So what I'm seeing, just to kind of bring us full circle here, what I'm hearing from everyone is that this is a huge topic. This is a huge problem, and it is super overwhelming to sit on a webcast and hear all these things and go, well, what am I going to do to change any of this? Like, I'm a planner for a community, and I meant what, the community next to me could care less, and I'm doing all this work here and no one cares. The community is around me. What does it matter? What I'm hearing, I think, is that the number one thing is the more you know, more communication, knowing this information, knowing the sources, knowing what to say to your decision makers that aren't on board with it. One of the things that I hear a lot and that I practice too is if you're trying to get something across to someone who just doesn't agree with you, you need to frame it in a way that interests them. And a lot of times with our public decision makers, it's money, right? So when we're talking about, all of this climate change happening, and by a certain time we could, raise 1 degree Celsius, and people who don't know anything would go, it's 1 degree. What does it matter? We already see some of the changes that are happening already without it even being 1 degree. And I feel like what I'm hearing from everyone here in terms of the policy and all of this is that we really need to put it into quantifiable terms to our decision makers.
Christina, let me just add that it's important to get the science straight, but there's an extremely strong case for mitigation and adaptation, extremely strong business case. So if you're interested, if your politicians that you're responding to are interested in saving money and earning a strong return on investment, then they need to be interested in climate change mitigation,
right?
Because we're talking about reducing waste. We're talking about reducing, electricity consumption, fuel consumption. These things go straight to the bottom line in the community and stretch taxpayer dollars further. And then when we're talking about adaptation, we're talking about risk reduction, and we're talking about avoiding catastrophic impacts to property, property taxes, the tax base of a community. The return on investment in adaptation is 6 to 1. So if you're interested in, hard-nosed economics and interested in making money and preserving economic growth and development, then you really need to be in the climate change mitigation and adaptation game.
Last question, if I
could.
could.
Go
Go ahead,
Christine. So 2 things.
Yes.
One is this PS report and this webinar, again, is like, think of it like a comprehensive plan for your introduction into climate change. There are entire PS reports diving into one little subject, like extreme heat has its own entire 150-page PS report, and climate resilience for infrastructure. There is so much more depth out there on everything. This is just to give you the overview and then allow you to really dive into a topic that you want to. So
last question is, thank you. Where do we start? If we're a community that hasn't gotten into the climate adaptation and mitigation game, what's the first thing you do? Do you try to somehow audit your community where you're at? Do you just sort of pick a topic and go with it? Where do we begin?
Sure. So Aaron and I we work for a company that does long-range planning for communities all across the South. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you can even bring the topic up. There is the ability to integrate good climate positive solutions into your long-range planning that don't even talk about climate change, or it's brought in, like as Ben's saying, it's on the economic side. That I go back to the ending slide of, talk about it, get educated on it, and then do something. Take that next step, whether you have to say the word or not. You can individually start to promote a positive influence on this, and then your next step.
Okay.
And those that are asking about the conversation side of it, I think I mentioned, but Catherine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us, is a great resource and provides, it's written in a way that understands the science like you need to understand it, but it also really talks about how do you interact with people that don't agree with you, and people that no matter what you say, they're going to tell you no anyway. So it's a great resource, and I highly recommend it.
I would just like to add to that, when it comes to the message, delivering the message, and the more you learn about this stuff, the more it can be kind of doom and gloom, but it's conveying a very positive and optimistic message to people. I think is hugely important. But then also, as Matt and Ben were suggesting, thinking in terms of co-benefits or the reverse of co-benefits, where in improving active transportation, you're not only creating a healthy community, but you are mitigating climate change. So a lot of co-benefits.
Great. Thanks you to everyone. This was a really great conversation. And we thank you. Again, we are recording the session. It will be available up on our YouTube channel, and we'll also have a slide deck available at ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. So thanks again to everyone who joined us today, and thank you to our panelists. And everyone have a great weekend, and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.